So one of the really cool things about the data that we're going to be working with is that there's a lot of information attached to the data. And in ArcGIS or in GIS any kind, this is called attribute data, right? So when you guys are out in the field and you're collecting information about a point, you're not just collecting where the point is, right? You're collecting information about what kind of soil's there, or what kind of vegetation there, or the slope, or any kind of data like that is called an attribute. So this is an attribute table from the Mary Beth Price data set that shows information about the U.S. states. And you can see a bunch of columns, and in GIS they call these fields. So I've got fields 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I've got 16 fields in this data set, or in this attribute table. And there's actually 51 rows of data, but I only copied 24 for you. Okay, I thought you don't need to see all of the states. But you can see some, we're going to talk about mapping different types of data this week. We're going to map qualitative data or thematic data as a type or as a number. And so you have to be able to look at the data fields and try to understand what kind of data they are. So when I open up the attribute table, I see first this field called object ID. And this is something that Esri creates when it creates a shapefile or a feature class. So I don't manipulate this. I don't even pay any attention to this. It's completely not useful to me. The other field gives me what type of vector it is. And so it's a shape field. I can't map this. I can't do anything with this field. So I just kind of ignore this too. But it's nice to know that I'm working with polygons. This field is called state underscore name, right? You cannot have a space in a field name. So you have to have underscores. You also can't start a field name with a number. So instead of saying 2,000 population, I have to say pop 2,000, right? In Esri, they limit that stuff. So I've got state names. What could I do with this field in mapping? What would you use that for, perhaps? Charmaine, what?
What would you use that field for mapping?
Yeah, why would I need this? How could I use this?
So the state of general location, or I don't know, I get it, understand.
Okay, all right. Yeah?
So if you were doing a map of the whole United States, you could maybe color them different?
Yeah, okay, all right. I could label them, right? Like, you know how we labeled, what did we label, schools or something like that? So I could use this to label the schools. I could use this to find, like do a search, like I only want to look at Oregon and Wyoming. So I could use this table to find just the 2 rows of data that I want, right? I could query that. So this would be data that's called nominal data, right? I'm just going to use it to name something. I probably won't I could make a map of all 50 states, and each state is colored differently. I could do that, right? That would be doable. This is called a state's FIPS, and it is a federal code that is unique to each state. So I think Oregon's state FIPS is 41. And this is also a nominal field. I could use this to search for. If I knew the FIPS number for states, I could search for that. If I didn't want to put a name, but I was working with the Census Bureau, I might label them by their FIPS code. Yeah, can't do much with this. This code, what could I do with this? This kind of really addresses your answer a little bit. This is called subregion. So what are you noticing about that data field? Almost like time zones, yep. This is categories. So this is categorical data. So I've taken each state and I've assigned it a region in the U.S. So I can make a regional map of all the states that are in the mountain region, all the states that are in the Pacific region. So this is called categorical data. And that's the kind of map we're going to make today. We're going to make maps based on categories of land use or categories of vegetation. State abbreviation is also nominal, right? I could search for you know, RI, OR, and WY, and just get those 3 states selected. I could also label them by their what am I saying? By their abbreviation. The rest of this data here, these other fields G through N, those are some kind of numeric data, okay? And so when I use this kind of data, I'm going to be making some kind of quantity map, okay? So on Thursday, we're going to look at the different types of quantity data and how we map those different types in various ways. This week, we're going to work on looking at categorical data and how do we map categories of data. Okay, so hang on to that spreadsheet. And just FYI, on an exam, I often give people a spreadsheet similar to this, and I ask them to name the type of field and what they would use it for, okay? So I might say you want to make a categorical map. Which field would you use to map categories? Or you want to label the data. Which field would you use for labeling? So just so that you know what that is looking like. Okay, so here we go. So we're going to work on qualitative thematic maps. Another way to think of that is just categorical thematic maps. Depending on who wrote the textbook, they're all presented a little differently. So remember we talked about thematic maps having a difference from reference maps in that thematic maps look at that distribution. So when we look at quantities, it's easy to think about rainfall, temperature, elevation, soil type, and quantities and qualities of data. So soil type would be categories of data. Vegetation would be categories of data. Population, crime statistics, literacy rates, all of those would be quantities of data. So we're going to really get good at kind of understanding the 2 differences. When I'm looking at qualitative or categorical data, I'm looking at some kind of type often. Like if I map schools by middle school, high school, or elementary school, that would be a type of school. So I would take 50 schools and each assign them one of 3 categories, right? So I'm not going to have 50 colors on my map. I'm going to have 3 colors on my map, right? One for each school type. Same with soils. I can look at soil polygons and take each soil polygon and assign it one of the major soil classification types. And each classification type has a different color. I could do that with roads. I could say I want to map interstate roads as bright red, unimproved roads as gray, and light-duty roads as a dotted line. So I can look at all of those different types of data. I might have 5,000 road segments, but they're all going to be one of 3 colors. And that's really different from quantity, because quantitative maps, I want to look at the magnitude, the number of information. So when I'm looking at schools, I might map the number of students that are in elementary schools as opposed to the number of students that are in high schools, right? I'm looking at a quantity. Soils, I could look at the depth of the first horizon on soils and be able to say, you know, these soils have a deeper A horizon or O horizon than these soils. When I look at roads, I could look at roads by number of accidents. So each road would be maybe symbolized based on the accident and not the type. So a real difference between quantities and qualities. When we look at the measurement level, when we talk about qualitative data, and I'm going to change this a little bit because, let me go back here. I want to nominal. Okay. You can really think of qualitative data as having 2 classifications or 2 types. Oh, there we go. One is nominal, so data that I would just use to make a label, right, or to search with. The other would be categorical, so data that is divided into groups. So let's say I have 100 tree points, and I have divided the trees into two categories, deciduous and conifer, right? So every tree is going to be either one of those two. So if I want to make a map of tree type, how many symbols am I going to have in my legend? Two, right? If I have 100 symbols in my legend, that means I'm trying to map the name field, not the type field, right? So if you try to map the United States and you use the state name, you will get 50 different color squares, and your legend will need to be this long, right? If you map it by subregion, I think there were 5 subregions, so you'll have 5 colors and 5 legends in your title. So that's qualitative data. You have to be able to look at the attribute table and kind of know which one you want to map. Quantitative data can be divided into these 3 types, ordinal, interval, and ratio, and we'll talk about that on Thursday. Okay, so qualitative data, you know, it kind of tells me where things are and what's different from other things, right? It doesn't tell me exactly how many pine and how many oak. I could count them, I guess, and see, but mainly I'm just looking for the general distribution of where things are. So let's see, attribute. So when you do a classification, you have to look at the attribute. And the attribute is usually, if it's categorical or nominal, the attribute is usually text. It's written, right, as a word. Grass, corn, it's some kind of value. Sometimes an attribute will be a number or a letter, and you need a key, right? So you may see soil type A, B, C, and D, and somewhere you've got to find a key to tell you what that means. And if it's a number, like it could be vegetation types. I think the vegetation key is numbered, and it's 1, 2 to 500. And you need a key to find out what, you know, vegetation type 200 is. So you can't always tell by the attribute type whether it's categorical or not, but you can tell if it's quantitative or not. Quantitative will never be a text, right? So if you see a number in there, if you see a text in there, you know it's not quantitative. You can't add grass and corn, right? You could add, you know, yield in grass and corn, but you can't add grass and corn themselves. Okay. So here is an example of categorical maps showing land capacity, or land capability, sorry. And it is different categories showing soils for vegetation types. Okay, so it gives them a class. So when you look at the data, this just says has a class number. And I had to go find the key to figure out what those class numbers meant so I could actually put words on the legend. Okay. And I think, let me see the rest of this. I'm going to skip this. Okay, la la la. All right. Quantitative. Okay, so just in general, we'll go over that. So if I'm looking at a point feature and I want to map it, I could map a point or a polygon depending on how zoomed in I want to be. So if I'm looking for a city and I'm taking the whole state of Oregon, I'm just going to use a point. But if I'm zoomed in on a partial piece of a county, I may want to use the urban growth to show that area. So different data can show the same thing just depending on the scale of your information. When we collect points, we can collect that from field observation using GPS, more and more using Digital Earth, and oh my gosh, if you have not downloaded Google Pro, it's pretty sweet. I was playing with it today. It's kind of going to put ArcGIS online. I think it may put it under. I don't know. So here's what a attribute table might look like showing vegetation type as a point, right? So I have a point with a tree, and the tree is an oak, and I said it's growing on this kind of soil, and it's that elevation. And here's another point that's another oak, but it's growing on this soil, and here is the elevation, and here's a pine on that soil, and there is that elevation. So if I wanted to make a categorical map, which of these fields would I use to map? Yeah, I would map the soil. and I could, or I could map that. I guess at this one it would be either one, right? If I want to know what kind of tree it is, I could map the trees. If I want to map the soils, I could map the soils. This will not be a category. This will be a quantitative map right here. Okay? That's not a good example. So lines are, we said, one dimension. They have an X and a Y at the beginning and the end of each segment. Those are also scale dependent. You can use a polygon to do the Willamette River if you're really zoomed in. In fact, it looks much better than just a line. So it just depends on how you want to map things. So I could map things by road type as a category. I could map them by material. I could even map them by who maintains them, whether they're maintained by Lane or Eugene. So I could have a map of Oregon with, or a map of the urban growth boundary for Eugene with red meaning Lane's responsible for the road, Lane County, and blue meaning Eugene's responsible for those roads. So lots of different options for mapping. Okay, so I don't want to go there. Where am I going? Where's my color? Okay, so here's two examples of categorical mapping. One showing type of forest for pre-European. So there's all these polygons, and they've been assigned one type. Here's vegetation types. Again, no way I could add up conifer and hardwood as it is here and get any information just from these fields. This is not categorical, right? So I've got, I can see data related to the percent of the population that has health coverage. So a whole different type of mapping. And you can see that the colors are different. Here I've got that classic choropleth map with one color range. Here I've got discrete colors so that I can identify the different types. With categorical mapping, there is no value to the colors. So I'm not saying that red is preferred over green. I'm just trying to show the different types, okay? So when I'm using qualitative or type categorical mapping, there's different ways that you can show those differences. I love this orientation, dead tree versus live tree. You could put that down there, or a live tree is green and a dead tree is brown. You can do that with line weights or line fill. You can do it with area fills or area colors, and you can also do it with kind of the type of geometry. You could have this for a house and this for just a office building. So you can have different symbols that help you identify the different types of data. This is a really bad map. So this is supposedly a categorical map where they have taken different battles and symbolized them by the battle type or the battle category or event. And it's just hard to read all of this information on here. I'm not sure the stars are the best thing to show on category mapping. Okay. You can have one variable, which is called a single variable. So I'm going to map the schools by school type. Or I could have a multivariate. So I could show all the schools and location of pedophiles, right? So, I could do group homes and identify the group home by the type of group home. Senior group home, disabled group home, criminal, what are they, halfway houses? I could do that so that would have two themes in one map. And I'm trying to get people to make an association, right or wrong. We're just looking at how close is your school to one of these places and what type of school is it. Okay. I love that. And the world is hardly ever just one variable. There's so many other things that impact the world. So here is lines, and they've shown the type of railroad by color, right? Ownership. This is Bush Kerry. So they took all of the states. They just gave the state a presidential finalist based on the what do you call that? Those guys. Come on, come on.
Electors.
Thank you. Yes, the Electoral College, and gave it a color, right? We don't know anything about how many, right? We don't know what the percent of people that voted. So this is not a quantitative. This is just a thematic categorical map. Another category, so they did take the name field, the name of the route, and colored each route. So there's a reason for that sometimes. If I had 400 routes, that would not make a lot of sense because it would be really difficult to show that many colors that you could differentiate. People don't do well. I think like 9 or 10 colors is about all people can see on a map. Here's major fuels used, categories. So they took all of those counties, figured out what their major fuel was, and mapped that. So however many counties got divided into 4 bins or 4 categories. Here's a multivariate map. That's showing the sediment type in color, so sand, silt, mud, and bedrock, and then the shellfish type as different kinds of hatcher lines overlaying that. So you get a lot of information when you have this kind of overlay in a multivariate. You can also look at change over time. So this is kind of just areas that are urban and how urban areas have spread out over time. I don't know anything about how many people. I don't have any information. Just I'm able to watch that distribution of urbanization move across the landscape, which is happening in the whole world. Okay, so what I was talking about earlier was if I tried to map the state name field as a category, this is what I would end up with. Right? My legend would have every state and each a different color. And then it gets really hard to tell which color, right? I'd have to, there's 3 of these pink ones, and if I don't know anything about the US, I've got this one, and that one, right? So mapping huge, long data sets categorically does not make sense. So you need to kind of look at your data. So this is the way that attribute table looked. It said polygon, had the ID, it had the state name, and that's the field I chose to map. What I probably should have mapped was the region, right? Because that's categories. If I'd mapped the state flower, I would get the same thing. I would get all 50 different state flowers and a different color for each flower. Okay, so that is enough of that. Sure, save that. Okay. And where did you go? Did I save that or did I not save that? Okay, wait a minute. Where'd my recording go? Come on. It's under here. Yes. Okay. Now, where is my done?